So hi, John from Learn Plus, and I've got Duncan Rose with us today, who is the head of EAL for 2023 at the Australian International Schools, Singapore. So welcome, Duncan.
Hello. Hi. How are you doing, John?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Very well. Just a long day. So end of a long day.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you coming on at the end of a Monday, which is always quite intense, I think, in your roles, because currently you're in charge of well-being for years 9 to 12.
Yep. A lot of well-being issues around all the usual things that have come out of COVID, plus. So just come out of EAL teaching for my science class, so it's been a long day today.
Well, I do appreciate it. And I sort of know from experience in leading pastoral aspects of of a secondary school just how difficult, particularly Mondays and Fridays tend to be.
Yeah, they're your big ones.
All right. Well, we'll start with a bit of your background for people who are listening. So how have you come to be taking on the position of head of EAL next year at the Australian School?
Okay. I'm probably one of those people who sort of fell into EAL, as in it wasn't originally a career path I'd ever considered, nor one that I thought I was ever going to take up, because I was a scientist, and I took my A-levels were all in science. I did the biology, chemistry and physics A-level set, which probably was a regret on my part afterwards, and then moved into biology at King's College in London, and I took my first degree in biological science, and I was specializing in animal behavior. And following that, I went into Bristol University, and I think I was one of those sort of wayward people who didn't quite know what they were going to do post-degree, and ended up on a PGCE, and they put me into a school in the middle of the St. George's area, right next to St. Paul's. That was my first teaching practice. And I remember going to the school, and we had the instruction, which was you're going to be working in one of the most deprived areas of Europe. It was in the top 10 deprived areas of Europe. And as a result, I think I learned quite quickly what you should and should not do in order to survive. That was my first teaching practice and first experience of teaching. The second placement was a lot nicer in some ways, and a lot more challenging in others. So the educational background was much higher in terms of the kind of material you had to get through, etc. But I think there was more camaraderie and more of a sense of spirit at the other school. It was quite enjoyable in that respect. I won't do the school. And then as a result of that, I went on to London, and I ended up teaching in inner city London for a while as a science teacher. And I moved there with someone I was doing my PGCE with, and he was fascinated with the idea of moving to Spain. So he was doing Spanish classes and other things, even though he was also a science teacher. And at a certain point, he went, right, I'm going to become an EAL teacher. And that was my first inkling that this could kind of happen.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, I think about 6 months later, I was getting on a plane to Japan. I'd never been there. It was quite a challenge.
Yeah. It's quite a scary thing to do.
Yeah, I think that first night in Osaka, I think blew my mind. Just, it was so alien and so unusual that you couldn't help but kind of be taken in by the both the beauty and the craziness of the entire thing. It was amazing. Yeah. Really amazing lights, amazing sounds, and just so different from everything I'd seen up until that point that it was captivating, and it was quite a big experience. And then, despite my promise that I was going to go to Japan and work in a small little language school that didn't really require anything, not in terms of qualification, it was very basic, and it was almost you speak English, therefore you are an English teacher kind of territory.
Yeah.
Mm.
And there are a few of those around.
There are sadly. I mean, this assumption that English speaker equals English teacher, I think, is one of the reasons that the EAL as a subject area doesn't always get the attention or the kudos that it deserves.
Yeah,
because it's almost it's a bit of a backhander in some ways. It's, oh, you're a language teacher, so it's just talking and you know,
yeah,
anyone can do that. As opposed to, there is a methodology, there are many methodologies, there's a lot of pedagogy, and there's a lot of work that goes into actually being able to scaffold language for people so that they can access it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I just like on that note, Duncan, I think you're completely right. So, you know, similar to you, I came PGCE, worked in schools teaching the subject of English, not as an additional language. And we'll come to it on your illustrious journey, but obviously we worked, or I worked for you at the British Council. And what struck me when I was there is the quality of focus on pedagogy, the quality of the teachers around me. And, you know, I think during my few years at the British Council where we were, I probably learned more about structuring a lesson and the sort of pedagogy of language acquisition than I did previously in these more respected areas. And I think you're absolutely right there. That idea that there are some shoddy centres out there that aren't asking for qualification stuff, it is really, really unfair that then that sort of tarnishes lots of EAL teachers with the same brush.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I had a tutor for my master's, and he was incredibly passionate about the idea that there was a lot of devaluing of the EAL qualifications and teachers. And he was saying that in order to get on in EAL, often you were far more qualified than your peers in other subject areas. You held master's degrees and other things just to get to the same level that someone holding a basic degree in, say, physics was going to be able to obtain a position as head of department or head of a particular area or something like that. But within EAL, these were people who were going off and doing doctorates in those areas and fields just to get to the same level as someone holding a master's in that other subject. And he was very passionate about the idea of trying to remove a lot of the sort of cowboy element and the sort of backpacking teacher element from our profession, because it would elevate the position as a whole. It would elevate the posts for those individuals who were professional within the EAL community. So I think I took a lot of notice of what he was saying at that time, and his enthusiasm for a more, how can we say, a better status for EAL teachers within the teaching community.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, thinking from a school leadership perspective is something that I'd like to see more of. So senior leadership teams placing more value on their EAL teachers, because I've seen and heard quite a few times over in Asia that, you know, going through that hiring process and your recruitment teams or whatever, go, oh, hold on a second, we don't need to pay this EAL teacher the same as we would pay our other teachers. We can find really cheap EAL teachers. Like, no, this is for a multilingual school. This is probably the most important role within your school to support these learners coming in. So from the very top and with head offices and things like that, you know, is something that needs to be addressed. And I think we all need to be on the same page that this is important. This is ridiculously well qualified, because you're right. You've got these teachers, masters qualified, sometimes going for doctorates, but they don't have a PGCE, the sort of lower qualifications. Well, you're not as qualified as these other teachers. This person is more qualified.
I think the other parts of that is the explosion in qualifications within EAL, which can be a challenge as well, because you've got very, very rigorous and well supported qualifications such as the Delta and the Trinity Diploma, etc., which on the qualifications framework for the UK sit very high up. But then you've also got the dodgy kind of TEFL certs and stuff that are, there's no teaching practice whatsoever, it's all online, etc. But when you do find teachers who are in EAL, that the really good ones have often been through that process of getting a diploma, getting the DIP or the Trinity sort of level qualifications that mean they are exceptionally well trained, they've been observed, they have delivered exceptionally well timed and planned and thought out lessons, often to a very rigorous standard that has been observed by an external, you know, assessor from Cambridge or another university. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, and I think that's what partly leads to the devaluation, is because it's an alphabet soup of basic qualifications, TEFL, TESOL, TESOL, you can name it. I mean, it's almost a bit wild westy in the acronym area. It does mean that people don't understand it. So you can say to an English language teacher, you know, you have a Delta and you'll get a degree of kudos and respect. You can say you've got a Delta to someone who works in an international school, and they probably don't recognize it in the same way they recognize a PGCE,
No.
even though for the job and the purpose that it's there for, it's an exceptionally good qualification to have to go into those jobs and roles. So yeah, kudos, recognition. They're a little bit challenging in that respect.
Yeah. So I mean, we've sort of given the title of this video podcast that how to support EAL learners in your schools and how to, you know, support them in their mainstream classrooms. The easiest thing a school can do is to understand the key qualifications and the key terms, so we know that Delta and Trinity are at the top, and give them the sort of equal weight, so that the people that you've got running the support in those schools are going to be the best possible candidates. And you know, sorry, Duncan.
And I would no, sorry, I was just going to say it cuts both ways as well. I mean, when I've had interviews with people, there is a couple of questions. Oh, sorry, there are a couple of questions, I should say, that are worth asking around the qualification area, because there are master's degrees out there in English language that have no practical element whatsoever, and there are master's degrees out there that contain a practical element that's assessed, etc. So when you're interviewing for the EAL posts, it is a bit of a minefield unless you know what you're looking for. You are looking for people who've done practicum. You are looking for people who've had those external assessors in. And even if they have a higher degree, it doesn't necessarily mean they have the practical application of that information. So a master's in linguistics doesn't necessarily mean that you can convey, you know, or you have the pedagogy to be able to convey quite challenging ideas to students in a multilingual background.
Yeah. About
grammar, about concept. I mean, we only have to look at things like the tenses, for example. Understanding that a language has a tense is very different to being able to convey the idea of a tense to a student who may never experience past tense, for example.
Yeah.
It involves a very different skill. So in interviews, yeah, I would say that you have those cowboy certificates at the bottom end of things, but you also have very qualified people at the top who also, in order to get the right people, need to have that practical application skill.
Yeah.
And that needs to be on.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, you talked about those two qualifications before, the Delta and the Trinity DIP. Yep. The Delta, notoriously, it's the practical aspects of it are some of the most challenging things that any teacher will ever go through. And so I've not done that. I've done my PGC, and I remember talking to some of the people going through that and thinking, my God, this is tough.
Yeah, it's not a friendly one. And certainly I remember coming out of mine and there was the final exam, I think was 4 hours. I think when I did it, it was 4 hour long. And I remember coming out and there was a sort of one person punching the air, shouting, "I've got it, I've got it." That was great. It was okay. They were the only person who failed. Interestingly, the rest of us who walked out were mortified by the entire experience, and we either scraped through or got it. And there was just one person who I remember punching the air, going, "No problem. Looks like it was a good one for me." Not necessarily true on that occasion. So yeah, a challenging one, but worth doing. I would just say it was probably one of the most challenging exams I've done in terms of variety, and also the fact that you couldn't make many mistakes in order to get through it. So it did force you to be very strategic and think very hard about how you were going to get through the entire course.
And well, that's interesting. That's coming from somebody who's done 3 A levels, all in the sciences, and a science undergraduate degree, but nothing.
Yeah. It was.
Yeah, well, we thought there, I know some really, really good advice there on, in terms of what a school can do in terms of thinking about their leadership and how or what to look for when we're interviewing candidates. So you went to Japan, and then how long were you in Japan for?
I promised myself 6 months, and I stayed 4 years, so I got it a bit wrong. I sort of I went through that whole cycle of homesickness and things that everyone goes through when you're away and you're in a very, very foreign climate. And I think I clicked it around the 6-month marker, interestingly. And at 6 months, I suddenly went, I really enjoy this place. I want to stay a bit longer. So I worked there for a couple of companies. I was a head of a language school, head of 2 schools at one point. I was a language instructor and trainer, and then I went off and worked for YMCA for a while doing English language instruction. I worked for a university there for a while. So I have a big mix of different things, but again, it falls very much into the category of you are English and therefore you can be an English language teacher. And a lot of the learning that I was doing at the time was, I had my PGCE, but it was in science. And I was using some of the techniques, but I wasn't really, I wouldn't say I was a language teacher. I'd say, I was very much in the category of the busking kind of backpacking teacher at that time. And it was only as I went through that journey that I started going, okay, I need to solidify this. So interestingly, I ended up doing one of those online courses that I've just basically said, no, not really great. But I did one of them online, and I wouldn't say I learned a huge amount because the PGC had got me to a certain place. But there was a part of it that I remember, which was a grammar part. And there was a grammar test and a booklet, and you had to do this grammar stuff online, and it was all timed. I remember doing it like a timed online thing. And I think that was probably the most interesting part of the course, because suddenly it was like, oh yeah, why is that tense like that? And why do we use that one in that particular? And it made me think more about the mechanics of what was going on in English, which I hadn't really thought about before. So that was the first kind of bit of, okay, I need to professionalize my English language teaching a bit more. And then I went to Turkey for a year, and I was offered a job in a university there. And part of the deal was that they would set me up with my Delta and my Masters in English language teaching. And I did a year there, but I wasn't feeling the vibe with the job. It wasn't quite what I wanted. I was doing textbook editing and lots of other things. I was teaching undergraduates, but it wasn't quite what I'd originally envisaged. So I made a choice, and I went back to the UK, and I took on my Masters and my Delta full time. And I went up to Bath University to do that. I had a very good set of teachers up there for the Delta. And they asked if I would take part in teaching some of the undergrad programs and stuff after a time. So I managed to get some teaching practice in at the same time as actually working for the university. And I ended up doing a couple of years there, working for them and working with their exam team. And also doing a bit of work down in Bath with, it was International Health then, now it's Kaplan. And I know the director there, very friendly guy who's written a couple of textbooks, and he was very informative and helped out a lot with the sort of early part of my professionalization, if you like. And following that, I got my master's, I got my Delta, and then I decided I'd like to start traveling again. And a job came up in Singapore, and I'd visited before, so I applied. And I was lucky enough to get it, and it was teaching English at the British Council in Singapore. And I think 6 months later, I was senior teacher for secondary, working with the young learners, because it was the background with the PGCE and the sort of swung it, I think. And I stayed there for 9 years, and was head of schools when I left, to come over to an international school. And in that time, I've got to remember now, I did another couple of PGCE courses, and I got another master's in there on curriculum design at a certain point. I think it was towards the end of my time at the British Council. And I moved over to the Australian International School in 2017, and I've been here ever since.
Fantastic. You have more qualifications in teaching than any person I've ever met, Duncan. But I'm really interested. But you're very, very well qualified, particularly in relation to your English language teaching, and that's something that you sought to address. Now, you sort of sandwiched work in mainstream schools with the big chunk of ELT in the middle. So I just wanted to ask, when you're coming back into schools and thinking about the mainstream classroom, so not necessarily an English language teacher, say a scientist, what lessons can they learn from English language teaching to help support their learners? Convoluted question.
Yeah. No. It's actually something that I find really fascinating, because having seen different aspects of English language teaching and science teaching, what I always come back to is just that word accessibility, and the whole, the whole kind of complexity of how do we teach, what do we teach, etc. It all comes down to, as a teacher, can you be a facilitator? Can you make the inaccessible accessible? That's really it. I mean, there's not too much beyond that. If you wanted to strip out all of the pedagogy, terminology, and the alphabet soup that goes with EAL, every single thing seems to have an acronym attached to it. Making the inaccessible accessible is what sits behind everything. And certainly one of the reasons I was attracted to the job I'm in at the moment is it allows me to teach EAL students science. So I'm doing IGCSE science for EAL learners. And the whole premise behind it is, how do I take quite challenging concepts, vocabulary, texts, etc., and allow students with low levels of English language to access those? So what bridges do I put in place in order to make that? Now, there are things I do as a teacher, the pedagogy and the way in which I employ voice, the speed of my language, the lexis I choose within the classroom, that all play a part. So straight off, the moderation of what you say, taking concepts and choosing the simplest language possible to get something across. Analogies. The number of times I've done analogies. In fact, I'm almost tempted to go and grab a couple of things that we've done recently, but we're teaching voltage, current, and resistance recently to EAL year 9. It's sort of 14, 15-year-olds. And all that we've done is we've gone through the concepts and then we've come up with our own analogies to try and put it into terms that they understand. And they had to develop posters which they constructed the analogy, and then they demonstrated in this scenario what is resistance and how does it work, what is current, how does it work, what is. And I've had some amazing ones. Like there was an ice cream machine, was one of them, and it was like someone pulling the pump on an ice cream machine, and that's the voltage to push things through, and the size of the nozzle that pushes the ice cream into the cone is the resistance, and if you change the size of the nozzle, you get a different level of resistance. And then the current is how fast you can fill the cone, the speed of the flow of the ice cream. So you get these amazing concepts, and the students, once they're able to kind of get their head around what this might be in a real term, or in a real life scenario, they're able to make the abstract ideas that are in science much more accessible. So you've got you've got the challenge as a teacher of how do I take something that can be big and challenging, and where you've got mainstream and native speakers struggling with this idea, and how do you package it into something where students can access it? That's the first bit. So conceptualization, language, that's the thing that you do as a teacher within the classroom. And then prior to that, you've got the how do you make texts and materials that are EAL friendly? And I've bitten back against this a little bit recently, because I think there's this assumption that you change materials to make them EAL friendly, whereas you actually change materials to make them friendly.
Yeah.
And if it's good for an EAL student, then it's good for another learner in the class who may also be struggling with an idea or concept, or needs help to access an idea. Just because it's a native speaker, it doesn't mean to say that we should photocopy a very dense text, stick it down in front of them and tell them to read it. Well, why are the techniques employed in EAL not going to help that learner to improve deployed? So things like teaching them how to use subtitles, teaching them how to write a one sentence descriptor for a paragraph next to the paragraph so they can find things in the text if they need to go back through. The use of diagrams to break up text, the use of jigsaw readings so that one student gets one piece of information, synthesizes it and passes it to other students. Reading races, reconstruction of text, where the students have to put things in sequences, particularly around things like rock cycle and other challenging ideas in science where they're co-constructing. Those things are brilliant, and they're really what you're after. You're after these very simple techniques that, I'll go back to that phrase, make the inaccessible accessible, because if you're helping the EAL students, you're probably helping a ton of other students in your class. And I think that's the one thing I would push with the whole notion of EAL in international schools. It's not about EAL students. It's about good pedagogy and helping people to access things that they might not be able to. And if we do that properly and we do it well, we'll bring other students with us.
Absolutely. Fantastic. I really like the term you use. We're not making it EAL friendly. We are making it friendly. And this is it. And it is ultimately about your professional learning networks. It's about the collegiality and learning from one another as teachers to implement these things. We are running out of time. I think there's 2 minutes left. So it's probably quite a nice way to end the conversation on that sort of rallying call of like what we can do in classrooms. Before I do, Duncan, I'm going to tag you in this on LinkedIn so people can connect with you, because you share some tips and advice on good EAL teaching regularly on there as well. So I assume it's okay for people.
Not as regularly as I should yet, but I'm working on it.
Yes, well, there we are, Duncan. So I've tied you into that now. So, but yeah. So,
thank you.
Hopefully a few people will connect on with you on that. It's been really, really valuable listening to the sorts of things that you do. So you are a good person to connect with. I certainly learned a lot from you in the past as well.
Thank you.
All right. Well, really nice to see you again, Duncan. And I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, John. Okay, you take care.
All right. Take care. Bye.